Thank you, everyone. I really feel honored to be the one to interview our guest of honor, Honorable Justice Julia Sebutinde, a judge of the International Court of Justice, the World Court.
Wow.
Please give a clap for her. She traveled all the way from The Hague to come and stay with us and share with us her story. And I will really let her tell her story. Julia is a lawyer, an international jurist. She is presently holding the position as a judge at the International Court of Justice, but she was also a presiding judge at the Special Court for Sierra Leone, trying Taylor, if you remember Charles Taylor. She was the one really making the difference in our... She has also held lots of other positions, judge of the High Court of Uganda, a consultant in Namibia for legislative drafting. She's also a legislative drafter, so that makes her work easier to draft judgments and write. She's written many of them. Julia, you are really here to share with us. How do you feel being the judge of the International Court of Justice, dictating to states what they should and shouldn't do?
Thank you, Margaret, for introducing me so kindly. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yes. You can hear me good? I don't know where to start. Maybe I'll start by saying thank you to Phenomenal Women for inviting me to participate in this fantastic forum. I had never heard of Phenomenal Women until Lisa invited me this time round. But I've learned so much already from all the people that have already spoken, but also from the questions that you've asked. I want to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I am Ugandan. I come from a family of 4 siblings, which is a small number by African standards, Ugandan standards. A lot of families, it's normal to have 14, 15 children, siblings, but I come from a family of 4. 3 of us are girls, with 1 brother. My mother got married at the age of 14, so that means that she didn't have much of an opportunity to go very far in school. But like NJ's mom, she went to the School of Slapology and Psychology. And she brought us up in a very disciplined way. And she had many, many gems of wisdom that she naturally passed down to us. For me, she's really my hero, in that she inculcated in me the desire to aim high, the courage never to give up on my dreams. And she always said to me, what is the worst that can happen? Always ask. The worst that can happen is they'll say no. And no never killed anybody. So go and do this, do that. And she always wanted more for her children than she had. So for me, she is the giant on whose shoulders I stand. Even though she never went beyond, I think, what you'd call primary 6 in those days. My father got married when he was 18. So he also never did much with his life. He was a civil servant, but together they felt that they had the best for their children. And we all went to college. All of us have more than 1 degree. And really they encouraged us to become who we became. So after I studied to be a lawyer, many years ago, purely by accident, because I remember when I was in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to study. And, but due to peer pressure, I said, okay, I'll try law. I didn't know any lawyer at the time. I went to law school. It almost killed me. I tell you, law school almost killed me. But I hung in there. And after law school, the first job I did was as a government attorney. I was very proud of myself. In the department where I was working, we were responsible for advising Parliament on turning policy into law. And this is what I was trained to do. And I did that in Uganda for 13 years. So we would turn policy into law. You go to a ministry, they want to do something in education, something new. You listen to what they have to say, and you draft a law based on what they've told you. You have to think to yourself, draft a law, sanctions, put everything in, and back and forth, and before you know it, Parliament is passing a statute that you drafted. And to this day, I still go back home to Uganda, I pick up a statute book, and there are the laws that I drafted many years ago, still on the statute book. So after serving in Uganda for 13 years in that capacity, I had the opportunity to then work for the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, and this is where I began my international career. My career has been interspaced with national work and international work. So I had the opportunity to work for the government of Namibia. At the time, in 1991, Namibia had just attained their independence, and they had the problem of not having trained legislative drafters like I was. And they needed to change their legislation because a lot of it was South African and therefore apartheid legislation. Now, you cannot imagine, unless you're South African, you cannot imagine what apartheid legislation was like. I'll give you an example. It used to be an offense for a black man to have any kind of relations with a white woman. That was an offense, punishable by imprisonment. But the other way around was not. A white man could have a relationship with a black woman. And the way the statutes were framed was totally amazing. So that was not an offense. And so for me, when I was living in Namibia, I had never seen so many colored people, biracial people. And I thought, if this was an offense, where do all these people come from? It just didn't make, it was a stupid question that I'd asked, to which I never got an answer. But, this is just to give you an example of the kind of legislation that we had to repeal, and we had to come up with new legislation. And in that regard, my greatest and proudest moment in Namibia was leaving the country 7 years later with a totally clean statute book that I had helped to contribute to, and to help them get rid of the old apartheid regime and with a new. So when I left Namibia, I went back to Uganda, and this time I was asked to become a judge of the High Court. I was also headhunted for that. In those days, you would be invited to become a judge. You would never apply to become a judge. And I was 40-something at the time, and I was filled with trepidation because I had never stepped inside a courtroom. Yes, I was a lawyer, but I'd never practiced law as in a courtroom. I was in a totally different field. And I remember saying to the Chief Justice at the time, I'd love to retire as a judge, but not right now, because I don't feel confident. And he said, but you can't retire as a judge. Nobody's going to employ you as you retire as a judge. We don't want retirees on the bench. Now is the time. So he asked me, what do you have? What skills do you have? So I began going through the list. And he said, well, surprise, surprise, this is exactly what we need for you to become a judge. You can write, you can draft, you can interpret law, you're a good writer of judgments. If you listen well, you've got good analytical skills. What else do you need? And suddenly my eyes were opened to the fact that whatever skills you gather along the way, somehow, get put to good use in the job that the opportunity that presents itself. So I was persuaded. I went back to Uganda. I became a High Court judge. And while I was there, I think 6 months into the job, The president of Uganda asked me to carry out a particular exercise that required a judge of the highest integrity. I was only 6 months in the job. I had bags under my eyes, struggling. They threw me in the deep end, struggling to figure out how to judge, how to write judgments, how to deliver them on time. And suddenly you get a phone call from State House, can you please come? The president of the country wants to see you and has an assignment for you, special assignment. Things could not get more scary for me. So anyway, I went, and he said to me, we have a problem in this country, there's so much corruption, the police force is in shambles, we don't know where to start, but we need an honest judge, and I don't trust these judges. But I've been told that you are trustworthy. Someone had said to him that I was trustworthy. He said, but they've also told me you have no experience, he said. So what are we going to do? So I said to him, yeah, I don't have experience, but you can trust me. If you're looking for a trustworthy judge, I'm your person. But if you're looking for an experienced judge, I'm sorry, there are better people that you can ask to do this job. So back and forth, I agreed to do this job like a stupid person. I got into there, I was thrown in the deep end, and the commissions of inquiry that I did, because I did the one into the police force, I did it so well. Before I knew it, he asked me to do one into the military. And you have to understand, in Uganda, when you're a judge, because of the work we do, they give you like police guards. Some are with you in the car, some are at home. But every 24 hours, you have police guards guarding you. So now I've gone into the police force. I've stepped on everybody's toes. I've got threats everywhere. Nobody wants to guard me. Everybody wants to kill me. So who's going to look after me? So I'm now given the military to look after me while I was doing the police probe. When that was finished, I was then told to do a probe into the military. And I said, now who's going to look after me if I step on the toes of the military? And that's exactly what happened. A year later, I'm investigating the military, and I'm getting threats everywhere. I tell the president, who's going to look after me now? He says, I'm going to give you the presidential guards. So I ended up having like a little barracks in my compound of these people looking after us. It still did not stop people trying to come and kill me because of the work that I was doing one fine day. And that was really risky for my family and I. But through it all, I learned a lesson to do your job, to be courageous. When an opportunity presents itself to you, when you're identified as the person for the job, not to belittle yourself, to grab it and give it your best shot. Because I honestly do not know where I got the courage or the wisdom to do the work that I did in that country, but I did it anyway.
Thank you, Julia. She didn't only get the courage, but she got more courage to try Charles Taylor. Tell us about that.
So
you went to Sierra Leone,
yes,
and you also came to The Hague. You tried Charles Taylor. You were listening to those stories of sexual violence, rape, and all that. Scary, because they are rebels waiting to be tried, and you are there taking your courage. How did you feel listening to those stories against women and girls? How did it impact on you, and how did you navigate?
So my time in the Special Court for Sierra Leone, where I served for 8 years, this was after all of this that I've just told you, is another memorable chapter in my life. Again, I was headhunted. I never looked for this job, but one day I'm sitting and someone here was saying, when do you know when to move? I was surrounded by people who wanted to kill me in Uganda. And nobody could look after me. Suddenly one day I get a phone call from someone in New York, says, "We've been following your story and we think it's time for you to move." I said, "Right, you think it's time for me to move? Why do you think it's time for me to move?" And so they tell me about this opportunity. I wasn't interested. I didn't even know where Sierra Leone was on the map, or what kind of job, I was in for. But they said, "We're not moving till you send your CV by 5 o'clock. This was like 2 hours to 5 o'clock. So I just sent in my CV, not really targeting the job. I just sent it in. The next day I get a phone call from the UN Secretariat. They want to interview me. And I was giving all these excuses like, I can't just leave my job to come. He said, "No, do you have a mobile phone?" "Yes." "We're going to do a phone interview on your mobile phone. Just give us the time in your office, lock yourself up, we'll give you an interview." And then I thought, maybe it's time for me to move. Let me give this a thought, a serious thought. So I did some basic preparation, and I got the job, just like that. So off I went to Sierra Leone. This special court was set up to try war criminals, people who were suspects of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Doreen knows because we were in the same trial chamber. She was one of our legal officers there. And we did a number of cases, but the most famous, I think, is the one of Charles Taylor, who is at the time a sitting president in Liberia. And he was accused of crimes and crimes against humanity that were committed not in Liberia, even though some were committed there in a different conflict, but in Sierra Leone. You might all have heard about blood diamonds and so on. And this was a tragic story that happened in Sierra Leone. So I was one of the few judges that was asked to go and try the criminals or the suspects. And Charles Taylor happened to be one of them. And unfortunately for him, I happened to be the presiding judge at the time of the trial chamber that was responsible for his cell. So you asked me, Margaret, what impression the case left on me, or the work left on me. Sierra Leone is a beautiful, beautiful country with beautiful weather. But I can tell you that for the 8 years or so that I was there, listening to the testimonies of witnesses, you'd walk into the courtroom, you're dressed in your clothes and of course your robe, you're supposed to be hot, like sweating. But the words that you hear are so chilling that you come out and you're cold and you sit in the sun just to feel warm. I remember this woman these are some of the few lasting impressions I have. One woman who had a 2-year-old daughter who had both her hands amputated by rebels. Her child's hands amputated. And this little girl didn't understand why this had happened to her. She was too little to understand. But she kept asking her mother when her hands would grow again. And this mom was sitting in front of us, testifying, and the lawyer asked her, "So what did you say to your child?" And she broke down and cried. She says, "I lied to her that one day the hands will grow back again, because I cannot dash the hopes of my 2-year-old daughter that her hands will never grow again." That was one story that lived with me. But there were many stories that would bring tears to anybody's eyes. Another story was of a woman who was 70 years old, who had been gang raped by some boys that might as well have been her grandchildren. And she came to testify. Her husband was seated in the front row, also 70 plus. Some of her children were in the front row as well. She was in the dock, the witness dock, trying to explain to the court what happened to her. Can you imagine the humiliation in Africa of a 70-year-old woman explaining how she was gang raped in order for the court to understand? Meanwhile, the accused were laughing in the dock. So these were some of the things that we had to deal with. And you can imagine me as a wife, as a mother, as a woman sitting there having to judge. And I remember, at least in the case of Charles Taylor, one time he cried because he also was a father. And he had a child, I think he has children, grown children. So this girl comes to testify, she was 17 years old. She was also gang raped, and she begins to tell her story. And the next thing I see is Charles Taylor takes out a big handkerchief and he's sobbing. And I asked, we stopped the trial, I asked him why he was crying. And he says, I have a 17-year-old daughter. This woman could have been my child. And of course the defense was objecting, we object, can we adjourn? The prosecution said no. He needs to know how it feels. It's good he's a father. He needs to know how it feels that somebody's child was gang raped. Somebody's child had their hands amputated. Somebody's child got shot, was killed, etc. And I think these are some of the human lessons that we learned as presiding or being lawyers on the bench, or even being accused. I'm sure Taylor will write a book one day about his experience. So that was my experience in the court of Sierra Leone.
What about the court? She is now at the International Court of Justice. Is it justice you are dismissing? What is your experience there? And what are some of the personal experiences and challenges you are facing during the course of your career? You've been to a judge in Uganda, Namibia, you are getting the laws, you move around to special court, now you are in the International Criminal Court of Justice. Do you get challenges which you sit down and wonder, is this justice?
First of all, this is a special court. The World Court is a special court, in that it's been around since 1945, since the Second World War, and it has been dominated by men, a certain type of men, mainly old white men. And so when I was applying, this is a court where you have to apply, and even, actually you don't have to apply, but you present your candidature to the United Nations. I tell you, it's complicated. You present your candidature and you campaign, and then you have to persuade the majority of the General Assembly and the majority of the Security Council sitting simultaneously to vote for you and give you the job. How difficult is that? So, so I went through this exercise in 2011. Before I got the madness into my head to vie for this position, I went through the website and I looked at the faces of the serving judges all the way down to 1945. Because I wanted, to me this was the ultimate court. I had dreamt for this, I had lived for this. But I looked and I thought, Julia, now you're taking this a tad too far. First of all, you never get this job. But secondly, even if you did get this job, they'll never take you seriously. Are you going to sit with these people and deliberate, and who's even going to listen to you? So this was voices within me trying to discourage me. I remembered my mom telling me the worst that can happen is they can say no. And no never killed anybody. So I said, I'm going for it. I had no clue what I was doing. Again, Doreen knows. I was sort of learning along the way. How do you apply? How do you campaign? Nobody knew me, really. Well, not exactly. Some people did know me, but this was a totally different kind of court. And in this court, I think nobody really knew me. So, and I was competing against a judge who had been working in the court for 18 years. He was a judge from Sierra Leone. So him and I were vying for this one position for Africa. And some voice in me was telling me, you're never going to defeat this person. He's on the inside, everybody knows him. Before that, he was an ambassador in New York. All the ambassadors who actually vote for people know him on by first name basis. You? Who knows you? Nobody. Zilch. And of course, the elections were not easy. In the UN system, usually if there's a difficult election, you go through 3 rounds, and then a decision is made. Well, ours took 13 rounds before a decision was made. And yours truly won.
She was the first African woman on the International Court of Justice. The first. Give her a clap for that.
It took a whole lot of courage.
And perseverance.
And perseverance.
But tell us.
So now, you see, the difference is our clients now are states and governments, as opposed to what I was used to, individuals. It's very interesting, so different, very interesting. And yes, we do dispense justice. It's a court where there are no appeals, so we have to be very careful. Before we issue a judgment, we have to look into all angles to make sure that we have not made any mistakes or errors of judgment, because if we do, the states concerned, are affected, and they have no recourse to anything else. And it's not just the state, but it's the people of a country that you affect. So the judgments that the court gives are very, very important. So my fears, sitting amongst these men, now became alive. So there I am. First of all, it's a pinch yourself moment. I'm driving through the gates. I'm thinking, I'm going to be stopped anytime. Somebody's going to ask me, where are you going? Where do you think you're going? Nobody stopped me, so I go. They ushered me into this new office. I'm still pinching myself like, is this my office? So anyway, and then the truth of the moment, we're sitting in our deliberation room. We go, we've heard a case, we come back, now we've got to sit and talk amongst ourselves. It's called deliberations. And frankly speaking, for me, this is the most enjoyable part of the work, because you get to hear, we all get a turn to speak. We all get a turn to speak. Immediately after the case has closed, the hearings have closed, each of us individually has to sit in their office and figure out how you would judge this case. And you write it down in a mini judgment and circulate it all on the same day to everybody else. And you then receive the others. There are 15 judges on the bench, so at any given time you're sitting with 15 opinions, so to speak. And I was thinking, probably these men are not even interested. Who's even going to be interested in what I have to say? But the beauty is, at the end of the day, each one of us has one vote in any given case, and the majority of the votes, that is the decision of the court. So, of course, you're not going to vote if you don't know which way you've decided. You have to know how you've decided. And there are 3 women on this bench. Of course, we're still in the minority. So the first thing I noticed, subtly, was whenever one of us was given the opportunity to speak, the guys, or some guys, some of the male judges, would sort of turn and start a little tete-a-tete amongst themselves. This was strange to me. It's like, I've been paying attention to everybody. How come when I start to speak, these 2 gentlemen, or those 3 gentlemen, are suddenly talking, and talking quite loudly, almost over the voice of the female judges? So one day I confronted my female colleagues and I said, look, am I imagining this? Or does anybody else notice this?